A stage is where stories are told and plays are acted out, but on the 4th of August 1991, on the world's greatest stage, the Indian Ocean, a story like no other would play out. A cruise liner sinking, her crew abandoning all the passengers and entertainment staff without any warning, and leaving them to die. This is the story of the Oceanos and how she sank. The Greek-owned cruise liner Oceanos was nothing compared to the ships at sea today. She was significantly smaller than the Aquilaro and many other ships sailing at the time. Her hull was rusty and dilapidated, and was coated with layers of paint, passengers describing her as not being fit for a cruise ship, as well as not what they expected.
My initial thought was, when I saw it, was it's small. When you go on a cruise, you expect this massive ship. Like you see on TV. I mean, I've watched shows on television, and you see shows on television about these luxurious big cruise ships and with the swimming pools and the tennis courts and whatever else on board on the decks. And it was like kind of weathered. It looked rusty. You know, you can see that the maintenance on the ship was not well kept.
Due to the ship's small size, the Oceanos only had 7 decks above the waterline, including a dining room, 2 lounges, a theater, and casino. Most of the entertainment occurred on the uppermost decks.
I tended to notice a lot of things because I was so unwell. I would find myself sitting on staircases quite a lot, you know, just trying to sort of calm my stomach. And I noticed little things like the undersides of the railings hadn't been painted, and I could see at least 2 or 3 colors of different paints. So the undersides of the railings, the iron railings, hadn't been painted properly the whole way through. So I noticed quite a lot of rust around.
But originally, the Oceanos was a very different ship. On the 12th of July, 1952, the Gillett board was launched from Giron Ironworks and Worksite Slipway. She was built for Messageries Maritimes.
She was built as a cargo ship originally, and she was trading between France and Madagascar and stopping off along the way, including in South Africa from time to time.
In 1970, she was bought by a different owner, Gillett Hellenic Lines. Along with this, her name switched twice, to Makina and then Aquina the next year. In 1974, the ship was bought by CS Ephrematis Lines. Her name was switched to the Eastern Princess, sporting an all-white hull and superstructure. In 1976, the ship received its last name to hold in service, Oceanos. This time, however, major changes would be made to her superstructure.
She was converted into a passenger ship, and then there were several further conversions made on the Oceanos as a passenger ship, so they added on structures as they went.
She immediately received a new lounge just forward of the bridge and had a slightly greenish and brown hull color. Not only was the lounge added, but there was an extension to the rear superstructure. Since this was done, the lifeboat that was now at the stern was moved up to this newer portion of superstructure. Why this section was added is unknown, but it could have been done simply to house the lifeboat. Around 1980, the current owners, Eberotiki Lines, made one of the last major changes to the ship in its life. They added another lounge above the forward lounge. This brought the ship to its final physical look. Just after, the ship was bought by Laura Lines. With this, the Oceanos now sported a blue hull and a white star on her funnel. Some changes happened during this time, however, none of them are really notable. In the late 80s, the ship was bought back by Eberotiki Lines. She would never again sail under another line, or name, from this point on. The only changes made to the ship after this time would be interior decor and exterior hull paint. Even up to her last few years of service, you could still see the Jean Laborde nameplate stamped into the side of the ship. It's July 28th, 1991, and TFC Tours, a tour company, made the decision to charter the Oceanos for a few voyages back and forth from Durban to Cape Town, South Africa, with a stop in Port Elizabeth along the way. On this voyage, a wedding was taking place, and most of the passengers were enjoying their time aboard.
At the time, I was 15 years old, and I was traveling with my mum and my brother, and it was supposed to be a sort of a nice holiday treat. We joined the cruise in Durban. It was promoted on a discounted rate to people because somebody needed to hire the vessel from East London or Port Elizabeth for a wedding. So basically they had a series of open slots between Durban and East London, and then people had to get off for 2 days, get back on again, and then travel back to Durban.
I was working with a travel agency called Rennie's in Bloemfontein in the Free State, and it was a promotion weekend for travel agents to go onto the Oceanos. We paid 100 Rand for the weekend to be on board. We had to get down to East London from Bloemfontein by ourselves in order to board the cruise to Durban. We were all colleagues with our husbands who decided to go on this cruise. It would be fun, right?
I was working for South African Airways at the time, and they had a special for all the staff to go on the Oceanus. So that is the reason why we actually went. We had to fly I lived in Durban at the time, and we flew from Durban to East London, and then the trip was going to be from East London back to Durban on the Oceanus. So that's how I got to be on the Oceanus.
And we were going for an overnight cruise to Durban. And then during that, while we boarded the ship,
it was supposed to be the holiday of a lifetime for us, and we went shopping like crazy, as you do for clothes, latest style clothing, and even though I was quite young, as was my brother, there was quite a lot of excitement for us because we'd never been on a cruise before, and it wasn't our regular sort of holiday. When we boarded the boat in Durban, the weather was very nice. We had a massive welcoming ceremony. There was band playing, there was snacks and cocktails being served outside on the welcoming deck, and they made a big show of sort of collecting everybody's luggage from the gangplank and walking you up and escorting you and introducing you to the captain and the first officer, and then you were escorted towards the cocktails and the bar overlooking the swimming pool, and then as we were leaving harbour, sort of just before sunset, so there was this whole thing around we were going to be leaving and watching the sunset go down, and the excitement in the air. Everybody was on this amazing cruise. It was definitely a carnival atmosphere, I would say.
As the ship was sitting in East London Harbour, the weather deteriorated. From this moment on, Captain Yannis Avanis had two options: to sail or to wait out the storm. He chose to sail.
The next day was an extremely windy and unpleasant day weather-wise, but we were excited, and so our journey started.
So when we got to East London, the weather was extremely bad. It was very, very windy. We could hardly even walk when we got off the aeroplane, but we thought, well, obviously when we get to the ship and we get there and they tell us it's not safe to sail, then we obviously won't sail. But when we got on the ship, we all were shown to our cabins and that, and we were all sitting in the lounge area, and I think there was a delay of like about 2 hours, and then eventually they said, okay, we are ready to sail. So we thought, okay, well, obviously everything must be all right if they think it's safe to sail.
Unbeknownst to the passengers, an incident that happened 2 weeks earlier would have already sealed the fate of the Oceanos.
One passenger had filmed the ship when she was leaving the port of Reunion 2 weeks earlier, and noticed that there was mud and stones kicking up next to the ship as she came out past the breakwater. And what we speculate is that the ship actually lightly grounded when she was leaving the port of Reunion, and that caused some damage to the shell plating of the hull. And in the heavy seas that the Oceanus then experienced, the shell plate fell off, and that's what caused the sea chest then to breach.
From this moment on, a chain of events would begin that would lead to the ultimate sinking of the Oceanos.
Onto the cruise liner, I definitely noticed that, people were uneasy because the weather was pretty bad. At that point, we had a number of people who were embarking with us that seemed to be a group of travel agents. They were obviously being given a sort of a short cruise to sample the wares so that they could sell additional tickets for the cruise line and or the holiday tour company, TFC. There were a few of them, even before embarkation, were asking, what's it like on the boat? And people had been saying that, how bad the weather had been.
Already the plates and glasses, and they were all sliding all over the place, and it was quite fun. I thought we were, because it was quite bad weather at that time. Because when we left the harbour, it was really bad. I mean, the pilot boat that took us out actually battled to get out there.
The weather was really bad, and where you did really notice how difficult it was in the dining room, where people would be eating their dinner. And there were these mirrored columns throughout the dining area that were basically storage for knives and forks, cutlery and crockery, and other sort of equipment that they would need for the dining hall. And I think on one or two occasions, you'd have a door pop open, and then this rack of plates would just slide out the bottom onto the floor. So, every night there was an episode of something popped out of the cupboard because the weather had been so bad.
I eventually just took myself off to the cabin, and I was there with the children, and we tried to go down for dinner, but it was terrible. The waves were just bashing our whole time.
I remember that my husband made a comment about the roughness of the water and the waves, and he said something like, "We will be fine as long as we are on the ship, but in the water is a total different story."
And that evening, when the show was due to start at 9 o'clock, I was down in the Four Seasons Lounge, which is just one deck below. And I was sitting in there, and Panagiotis, the barman, was called in by two guys from the engine room. And I thought there must be trouble down in the engine room, maybe a fight, because he looked like a big strapping lad to sort the lads out, getting out of hand, But it wasn't to be. He came back and he just said to me, "Just watch the bar for a moment, Robin, I'll be back shortly." When he came back up, his arms were up to his elbows in filth. He'd been trying to stop a pipe, a sort of a stopcock, release valve sort of thing, which he couldn't do. And he said, "Oh, it's a mess down there." He said, "There's water everywhere."
Around 8:30 p.m. in the auxiliary engine room, both the chief engineer and third engineer are working their best to clear a blockage in the sewage ventilation pipe, when suddenly
And water came pouring in through the side of the sea chest, and water started filling up the area of the generator room where that sea chest was located. Next door to the generator room was the space where the sewage works were installed. The engineers closed up the watertight doors, but with the watertight doors closed, it should have stayed afloat, but it didn't. And the reason for that was that the water then rose up to the level of where that pipe had been removed and started leaking through there into the rest of the ship. And from there, it leaked through into the sewage system, up through a valve which had not been shut from the sewage system, and out through the bathrooms.
the chief engineer, who is now in the engine room, calls up to the captain to report on the situation. He tells the captain that the ship will sink. This confuses the captain, but he eventually understands. The chief engineer hangs up and proceeds to shut down the generators.
That evening, we were all sitting down for dinner, and more than usual, the cupboard doors were opening and things were falling out. And I didn't realize it at the time, but a lot of the staff were supposedly running around in the kitchen with life jackets. And the only reason I knew about that was because as we were leaving, my mom was speaking to a gentleman who'd been stood at the bar and one of the doors had opened, and he'd asked the question of, well, why is that guy wearing a life jacket?
I wasn't feeling very well. I felt a bit sick and decided I went upstairs actually to go and find the purser's desk. Somebody said to me, oh, you can get seasick tablets from him. So that's where I went. I went upstairs, and actually when I got to the purser's desk and I, asked him for some seasick pills, he said to me, never mind about the seasick tablets. You better go down to get your life jacket from the cabin. And I was just, what? It can't be serious. And he said, yes, absolutely. Go and get your life jacket and go back on deck upstairs to the lounge.
Some passengers are in their cabins and some are in the Odysseus lounge as a show is taking place. And without warning, the power dies.
We were about to go and have dinner when we were in really heavy waves, and suddenly all the lights went out.
And the lights went off.
As I was about to flush the toilet, the power went out.
I heard this, it was just like a thud, and the lights went out.
Which was unusual. And then the silence after that, you could notice that there was definitely no engines working. So you were not only in the dark, normally you had music being piped through sort of a radio station, piped into the bedroom. You could turn it on and off. We'd had it on all the time because not having a window, it was quite disorienting not to hear anything. So we used to have the radio on. So the radio had gone off. It was dead silent, no lights, no emergency lighting came on in the bedroom. I kind of tried to make my way out onto the walkway, but of course I couldn't see anything, so I bumped around the cabin for quite a bit.
That's a really frightening thing to happen at sea, because it's never happened to me before. And little emergency lights come on, but it's still very dark.
I couldn't see a thing, but shortly after that there was emergency lights coming on to let you see what you're doing. At that time my husband came into the cabin and said it's time for the show to start. I cannot remember the exact time of this, but it was around 9 o'clock, 2100 hours.
And the emergency lights came on, but it was it was still quite darkish inside the entertainment area where we were all sitting now. So we couldn't really see that much, but at least there was some light there that we could actually concentrate on.
When the lighting did come back on, sort of about 10 minutes later, the tannoy system was announcing that everybody should make their way to the main lounge area. At that point, I did see some staff wearing life jackets walking down the passageway towards me. So I that took me aback a little bit.
And so we're thinking, oh my word, what's going wrong now? So I went up to the lounge where we were due to go and play music, and a lot of guests were all going into the lounge. They'd left the restaurant, and they were also wondering what's happened with the lights, what's going on. And it's just a natural place for everyone to gather. They all went to the lounge.
Myself and my brother made our way up to the main lounge area, and my mom was already up there waiting for us.
My ex-husband came to call me from the cabin to say that he thinks it's a drill that we have to do.
So we proceed back to the lounge area to watch the cabaret. Upon our arrival, we realized that the power was still out, so no show could proceed because there was the music needs. They need music, lights, etc., and that needs power. We ordered ourselves another drink, and then waited for the power to come back on.
We had a number of staff from the tour company that were in the lounge, and obviously, as sort of within the 10-15 minute period, we had the full complement of tour staff.
So they were seeing me then. I was up on the stage and I didn't have any electricity, so I couldn't use any microphones. And they were all saying, Moss, what's happening? And I was saying, I'm not sure. Just sit down, sit tight. I'm sure the power will come back on just now. And then Tracy came into the lounge as well. And it's still very dimly lit. You can hardly see. And people were starting to get a little bit nervous and maybe a little bit sort of close to panicking. So I thought, well, the best thing I can do is I'll try and start singing some music.
Entertainment crew, I think it was him, got up on stage with a guitar and took his place on a chair and started to sing and entertain us while the power outage was attended to. A little bit later, the announcement was made that there's nothing to worry about. We experience a power outage like it happens in any city like Cape Town, Durban, etc. They are busy attending to the problem. It will be sorted out shortly. So we didn't worry because they have it under control.
Dancers, the musicians, everybody, like helping to calm people. There definitely were a number of people who were panicking because we weren't being given any information. So there was the tour staff started doing a lot of singing with everybody, and it got quite sort of festive, I would say. People were being given alcohol as well. So, people kind of relaxed a little bit.
But they entertained us and they were so good. We really had a fun time. We had a nice sing-along. So we had a fun time. The comedian came on, he was quite funny, and we really enjoyed ourselves.
So because we didn't have any electricity, I couldn't use microphones or my keyboards or electric guitar, so I just used an acoustic guitar, and I started singing a few Beatles sing-alongs and having fun, and that worked for, a while, 5, 10, 15 minutes. But people kept on saying in between songs, what's happening? And I kept on saying, well, look, the power will come back on, and I'm sure they'll make an announcement just now. And I kept on wondering myself, why is there no announcement? Why is no one saying anything? Where's the officers?
It's 11 p.m. and the Oceanos is sinking. Unbeknownst to the passengers, the crew members are getting into the lifeboats and bringing their luggage with them. This is until a passenger, Piet Niemand, notices.
And during the night, I actually went outside just to have a look what's going on. There was and I could just look down onto the side there where the lifeboats were. That was like early morning. It was still a little bit on the darkish side. And apparently it was the crew members that was boarding the lifeboats. So they were some of the first people into the lifeboats, which I feel is obviously not right, and it is not right.
And then, while I was singing the song, we had big windows down the side of the lounge, and I heard a noise, and I looked over and all the passengers looked over, and we saw a lifeboat going down past the window. And that's scary. And everyone was like, what's happening? And then the whole lounge, blah, 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 was going for it. So I said, okay, everyone calm down, everyone sit down, everyone wait here. I'm going to go and try and find out what's going on. So I left the lounge, and then I went to go and try and find somebody who knew what was happening. And I found the cruise director and the captain. They were talking, and I said to them, what's happening? And the captain said, look, we're going to abandon the ship. So I said, well, why? Are we sinking? Is there a fire? And he said, no, there's no fire. We're not sinking. I'm just going to abandon the ship as a precaution because we can't get the engines started. So, I was thinking, well, why do we have to get off the ship in the middle of the night in such a bad storm? I was scared to do that. And I said, well, but why do we have to get off the ship? He said, no, it's just a precaution. We're going to abandon ship. And I said, but then we must be sinking or there's a fire. No, we're not sinking. There's no fire. And I was just a guitar player, Now I work on ships. Now I'm a cruise director. I work with the captain all the time, and I'm a senior officer. But then I was a guitar player. You would never argue with the captain. I'd never even spoken to him before. So I thought, okay. I went back to the lounge, and I didn't say anything to the passengers, but I said to Tracy, look, this is what's going on. He wants to abandon ship. We carried on playing a few more songs. But eventually people were saying, what's happening? And the ship, we could feel the ship starting to tip over onto its starboard side, the right-hand side. And the floor was starting to go down like that. And we thought, uh-oh. and I knew I couldn't stop people from panicking. They were getting so nervous, so tense. So I said, okay, everybody, please wait here. I'm going to go and find out what's happening. Nobody leave the lounge. I left the lounge. I said to Tracy, stay in here, try and keep people calm. I went and found a couple of the other entertainers in one of the bands who I was friends with, and we kind of got together. They went into the lounge to keep people calm, and then I said, I'm going to go and find out what's going on, and I wanted to go down below and see what was happening in the engine room. So I took a friend of mine who's a magician, Julian, and right, let's go. And we started walking down the staircases, walked down, didn't see any problems, and eventually we got right down to the engine room, and we saw some of the crew running around, and they were all shouting. Some of them were packing their suitcases, small suitcases. Some of them were even looking a bit wet. And so we thought, oh. And I tried to speak to some of them. They just ignored us. It was like we weren't even there. So we said, look, there must be a problem. So we carried on down lower, and the lowest part you can go to in the ship is an area called the shaft tunnel. And that's where the propeller shaft runs right through the ship and out to the propellers. And so we made our way down to the shaft tunnel, and we got there was still no water. So we thought, okay, maybe it's not sinking. So I said, let's start walking forward, and it was so dark. As we were walking forward, we came to some watertight doors that were closed. Now, why would they close the watertight doors unless there was water there? And so we went up to the watertight doors, and we could listen, we could hear water the other side of the doors as the ship's rolling around, and it's dark down there. We could just hear so all the water sloshing around. So we thought, oh man, this ship is sinking. And we were right below the waterline, and you feel it in your stomach. You just feel like this sudden fear. So we ran back up the stairs. I went and found the cruise director, and I said, listen, we've seen the watertight doors closed. We haven't seen water, but we can hear it. We're sinking. So we went back to the lounge, and we thought, well, there's still no announcements, no alarms, not one single word over the PA system from the officers, nothing. So we went into the lounge and thought, well, we need to try and start getting people off this ship.
About an hour later, another announcement was made about the problem, that the problem seems a little bit bigger than they anticipated. Something was said about a little explosion in the engine room, and there's a gap in the ship, and the ship is taking in water, but it's still not a concern because they are busy pumping it out and fixing the problem. Please don't panic or worry, everything is under control.
We were sat there for about two hours before we were given the request to evacuate women and children first. During this whole time, the weather actually had been pretty bad, obviously, and you could see the rain and the being lashed against the side of the windows. And obviously people sitting at funny angles now because you know the ship is listing on one side.
And then the things just got worse and worse and worse, and eventually they gave up trying to entertain us, because we were all singing along, we are sailing, and and then that stopped as well, and everything became really serious, because then the tour leader, her name is Betts, they started handing out the life jackets. I didn't see any of the crew members helping at all. It was more the entertainment staff that helped. I myself helped to hand out some of the life jackets as well to the people. And that's what we all stayed in the lounge area that night, in the entertainment area.
They went to go fetch life jackets. We gave everybody, the tour staff, we had given them the number of life jackets of the people that were staying in the cabin. So for us, it was 3 in our cabin.
At about 12 o'clock that night, people started to hand out life jackets, but we were asked not to panic or be alerted, because this is a precaution measure, and it's part of the safety precautions on board. So we were showed how to put it on, and that's what we did. And then the long wait begins.
They came back and said that they couldn't find our cabin. Now, our cabin was the last on the Venus deck, and it was exactly opposite the staff smoking area. So it was basically the last cabin on that whole deck. And my brother went in, and my brother eventually went down to go and fetch them because the staff obviously couldn't find the cabin. And he came back, and I'll never forget, his eyes were as wide as saucers. And he said to my mom in quite a loud voice, "Mom, you'll never believe it. There's water floating all over the floor." At which point we had, my mom and all her friends say, "Shh, shh, don't say anything, because we obviously didn't want to start a panic amongst all the other passengers. But he'd said that he'd literally got to 3/4 of the way down the passage before he started walking on water flowing down the deck. Obviously this is still when the ship is at a list, so he said it was a real struggle because he was trying to sort of walk with one foot on the walkway and one foot sort of bracing himself against the wall. So getting into our cabin, he said he had to push the door because the water behind the door was quite substantial.
It's been 3 hours since the ship started sinking. Just past 12 in the morning, the Oceanos is flooding from every deck up to Venus deck. Not only is water flooding the forward cabins, but it's also starting to flood the aft cabins as well. This flooding eventually makes the ship unstable. The ship slowly rolls over to the starboard side, and this rolling will continue as time goes on.
When we were keeping all the passengers in the lounge, I kept on wanting to go and check to see how fast the ship was sinking, because I didn't want us to be trapped and suddenly the ship would turn over and we'd be trapped inside. So I kept on going down, and we didn't let anybody else go down. I put some of the band, the musicians, the piano player and the drummer at the top of the stairs and didn't let anybody go down. And so I was going down. And then one time I went down with my video camera, and I went down the staircase, all these nice, lovely carpeted stairs. And as I came down towards Dionys's deck, which is actually D deck, I could hear the water. As I was going down the stairs, I couldn't see it because it was so dark.
I'm right down below now. I'm actually on end deck, nearest deck. There's water everywhere. It looks like it's flowing in reasonably fast. It's sloshing about from side to side, and it's now 5 minutes to 1 on the 4th of August. Must be Sunday today. So I guess we're going down.
Out of nowhere, a crew member warned Moss Hills about filming and told him to stop.
Really hard to believe. That's the bottom of the stairway. Yeah, I just see the water down there. No. Yes. Yeah, going up. Up. Yes, but there's water everywhere. Up. Yeah, Robin has looked down here now as well. Yeah, no, I take a bit of the camera down. Yeah, I keep the camera everywhere.
When I saw that water, you could see the little bits of the emergency light glinting in the water. And when you see it, and when you see water rushing down a carpeted passageway of a cruise ship, that's a frightening sight. I mean, just, but you've got to try and always think a little bit positively, think of a way out of things. I didn't let it panic me. I just remember thinking, okay, so the water's up to this level now. That means all of the engine room and all of the crew areas are completely flooded, because if it's up to this deck, those other decks must be underwater.
Then he came up to the main lounge where I was with the passengers, and he said to me, "Robin, there's water everywhere downstairs, and it doesn't look very good at all. I think we're going down." It's the first time I heard the news that we probably would be sinking. And I thought also with them lowering the lifeboats. You don't lower lifeboats in those weather conditions.
At some stage, I asked my husband to go down and get my handbag because everything is in there. My house key, my driver's, my ID, all my personal belongings. And I think his wallet was also in my bag. They wouldn't let him go down because the lower levels were already flooded and no people was allowed down there. Everybody had to stay in the lounge area. The toilets were a mess. Due to the rocking of the ship, the insides of the toilets landed on the outside. We tried to use the toilet once, but it was so messy, so we decided not to go in there.
It was about 2 hours in that we were told women and children needed to organize themselves towards the exits so that we could start climbing into the life rafts. At which point the men started, there were quite a few men that were sort of pushing their wives with kids to go towards the exits, and there was a lot of resistance from some of the women because obviously having 2 children and just yourself and you're going onto a life raft, it's quite a scary prospect.
So we started organising passengers, and we went around to them in small groups and said, look, we're going to start to evacuate the ship. We're just going to do groups of 20 at a time. We were just making this up. I mean, I don't know where we came with that number. We said, we'll do 20 guests at a time. We'll take you out of the lounge and out to a lifeboat.
I cannot remember at the time that they started to get the people, women and children, out of the lounge area. It was called that women and children and the elder on board has to move to the front of the lounge area because they are going to put them into safety rafts or boats.
What the amazing thing that struck me was how everybody started pulling together to help each other. So you had a lot of people saying, don't worry, we're all in this together. We're all going to look out for each other. So we were on the first life raft that was basically going to be put down on the water. We'd heard that the only motorized life raft had left the ship earlier, and they had been waiting for that to come back before they started evacuating other women and children. But it never came back, at which point the staff, the tour operator staff, had taken the decision that women and children needed to be evacuated to the life rafts. So walking from the main lounge to the sort of exit doors towards where the first of the sets of life rafts were, we were actually walking along the windows. So we had to climb over roulette tables. There was a roulette table and there was a couple of other card tables, and those things weigh near enough 2 to 3 tons, and they'd been tossed around like toys because the ship had been at an angle like that, so there was smashed glass everywhere.
It was around this time when Moss Hills and a few other staff members made it to the lifeboats. But when they got there, they ran into a problem.
But when we got to the lifeboats, we didn't really know how to launch them, and some of the crew, the Filipino crew who worked in the engine room, were around, and they normally launch the lifeboats, but they wait for orders from the officers, and nobody knew what to do. And so I was saying to them, you must start launching the lifeboats. But I mean, I'm a guitar player. You don't take orders from the guitar player. But eventually they did, and so they lowered the lifeboats. We couldn't fix the lifeboats in place properly. And you're supposed to lower the lifeboats to this one deck, and then you fix them to the side of the deck, because as the ship's rolling around, the lifeboat's swinging out and crashing back in, and swinging out and crashing onto the side of the ship, and bits of the lifeboat are breaking off. And so guests and the passengers were now getting scared to get into the lifeboat. But I managed to get them into the lifeboat, but the more people we put into the lifeboat, the heavier it got. So when it swung away from the ship and crashed back into the side of the ship, it was with such force the people in the lifeboat started screaming. So we were launching the lifeboat when it was only about half full, because it was too dangerous to fill it up. And then by the time we'd launched all the lifeboats on the starboard side, the right-hand side of the ship, and the ship was tipping over more and more that way, we then went to launch the port side ones on the left-hand side, but the ship was so tipped over that the port side boats wouldn't go down. So all we could do was we tried to release them and left it tied up to the ship and just left it floating in the water.
My mom's friends, because they didn't have young children, they stayed behind on the ship. We were put onto the life raft. My enduring memory of that was, your brain, in a situation like that, my brain tended to kind of shut down a little bit. So, I didn't feel panicky. I felt calm, because I thought, well, at some point, something's going to happen. There's no point in me panicking about it now. But my enduring memory of that was gale force winds, and we are hanging off the side of a cruise liner, and basically all I could hear was these crates of alcohol being thrown overboard, hitting the water, and the glass being smashed. And I kept thinking to myself, if we hit that water, we're going to get cut to ribbons, because the heaviest thing on a cruise liner is the alcohol. So they were trying to obviously divest the ship of some of the heavier things, because they wanted to lighten the load a little bit. But I did keep thinking, if we hit that water, we're going to be sliced to ribbons from all that glass flowing around. And then the other thing was, it's gale force winds, and the ship's at an angle. We are on the side of the ship where basically we would be sliding down the ship rather than landing in the water. And so every time the wind blew, our life raft was hitting against the side of the ship. And little flecks of paint, you could imagine those life rafts, they were made from wood, but they had to be painted. And they probably got painted a couple of times a year, so there were a number of coats of paint on the life rafts. But all those little chips of paint were flying around in the air, so you had to sit there with your eyes closed, not looking at anything, because the paint was just getting chipped off and flying around in the air.
During the course of the night, I actually opened the side door on the port side of the vessel, the left-hand side, this is the high side, because we were listing from port down to starboard, and I cracked the glass, the little window open, and took the key out and opened the emergency door on the side. I said, if anybody wants to smoke, they can go out on this balcony to smoke. But really, I wanted an extra exit, because the way the ship was angled, and I thought if we turn turtle, at least we have an extra escape route, because we're all wearing life jackets, we can all float to the surface.
We were put onto a lifeboat, which was hanging from the edge of the ship on the outside, and we sat in that lifeboat. Well, it felt like forever, but it was probably 10, 15 minutes, with the rain pouring down on us and the wind blowing, and no one knew how to release the lifeboat from the ship. Eventually, some crew members went into the cabins and just threw us blankets from the cabins, because we were getting so cold outside hanging on this lifeboat. Then somebody basically just chopped the wire that was holding the lifeboat, and then we fell into the ocean. And one of the things that I will never forget, there was this old woman sitting opposite me in the lifeboat, and this hook that was holding the lifeboat, it came swinging past my head, and it hit this old lady right in the middle of the forehead. And the blood was just squirting everywhere, and I just felt terribly sorry for her. But then some people helped her and managed to stop the bleeding.
When we were all in the boat, they realized that the Oceanos is so flooded on the one side that if they release that safety boat, it will be crushed under the Oceanos. So we all had to get out again. That was disheartening, because then I realized that we are stranded on this ship. We are going to drown, or be eaten by a shark, but to get off is not one of our options. I remember telling my husband that I'm not ready to die because I still want to have children. We were married for 10 months then. We had another chance at a safety boat. It was on the other side of the ship. So what happened here was that the crew formed a human chain, because the windows on the side of the ship was knocked out to get access to the safety boats. So if you walk on the deck, there is no windows, only the railings to hold on to. So we were lined up, and you were basically handed from one person to another next to him to get to the point where you can get into the safety boat. Now, that was another nightmare. Due to the water being so rough, the safety boat is dangling from the side, and then when the safety boat slams against the ship, you have to jump down into the safety boat. So our one friend, Frank, said that he will go first in order to catch me and his wife when we have to jump in, and then my husband will follow behind me. And that's what we did. The minute he landed in that safety boat, they told us that the boat is full and that we couldn't go with him. My friend, his wife, Beulah, was devastated. You can imagine your husband going into this safety boat and you must stay behind. That was horrible. She cried, but there's nothing that we could do about it. So there we were outside on deck, no other safety boats we can go to. We were stranded on this ship, so we decided to sit outside on deck and wait to see what happens. It was not freezing cold, it was okay to be outside. It felt a bit better than to be on the inside and not knowing what's happening out there.
When it became light outside, we all went outside. We were all told to go outside and sit on the deck. And we were sitting on the deck, and that's all we could do, and it was already listing very badly. The ship was already listing very badly.
Once they got out on the pool deck, they could see the angle of the ship to the horizon, and that's what made everybody just gasp. Suddenly you're now aware of the actual angle you're sitting, getting used to. We got the guys to sit against the deck rail on the high side, the port side, and their arms were linked behind the rail, and then their legs would link the passenger in front of them, and the passenger in front of them would link their legs around the next passenger. So we had these long little lines of passengers all sitting.
We were actually singing. We were trying to keep good spirits. We were singing. We were slip sliding away, and it was something just to keep the spirit up, I suppose, and which was actually something that I would never forget.
And then we knew, well, we had no other way to get off, and we had still quite a lot of people left on board, more than 200 people still on board. So I said, right, let's go to the bridge, ask the captain what's going on and how can we help. So we thought, right, we can't do any more, let's go to the bridge. So we went up to the bridge, nobody was there.
And all I could hear was, Oceanos come in, Oceanos come in. So I answered the radio call. I've been doing lots of bridge visits, so I've been up there a lot. And I answered, it was shipping in the area, and they gave me the time of arrival, and what are our conditions like. And to the best of my knowledge, I told them, well, if you're coming in about 3 or 4 hours, I'm not sure if we can still be here, but full steam ahead and come and see what you can do.
Eventually another ship answered, a ship called the Ned Lloyd Mauritius, and a guy called Captain Detmar. And he came on, he was very calm, and he just said, yes, what's your mayday? And I said, with the cruise ship Oceanos, we're sinking. Okay. And he said, what's your position? So I said, we're halfway between the port of East London and Durban, South Africa. We're halfway between the two. And he said, no, what's your position? What's your coordinates? And I said, well, I don't know what the coordinates are. And he said, what rank are you? And I said, well, I'm not a rank, I'm just a guitar player. And he was saying, well, what are you doing on the bridge? I said, well, there's nobody else here on the bridge. Where's the captain? I said, well, he's not here. Well, where's the captain? Get him. I said, he's not here. And I think it's not that he didn't believe me, he just couldn't understand why the guitar player was on the bridge. And it almost sounds like a joke, because it was me and Tracy and Julian the magician, so it was the guitar player, the bass player, and the magician on the bridge, But then he was really very good, he stayed very calm, and he was very calming influence on us. And then he said, okay, how are we going to find your position? And I said, well, I can see another ship in the distance, and I could see it quite a long way off, but I could see its lights, bright light, and it was a tanker, and I could see it, and I said, if he could ask all the ships in the area to try and go on a lookout and see if they could find us, which they did, and that ship eventually said, okay, we can see the Oceanus, and then they put him onto my radio frequency, so I was talking with that ship. But none of the ships could come and help us because we didn't know how to operate the lifeboat hoists, and they were going to send us a lifeboat, but we couldn't hoist it up because we didn't know how to work any of the equipment.
And while I was doing all the chatting and things, and Moss had been all over the ship with his camera, from downstairs in the water, all that sort of thing, and he came upstairs. Tracy was sitting on the bridge wing, his wife, and Moss came in and he filmed me on the bridge on the radio. And you wonder, how's this all going to be? It's a bit like being in a movie, but you haven't read the script yet, and you're not sure whether you're going to get off or not. So we'll just wing it. We'll just carry on and see how the movie ends. Luckily, it ended well.
We were holding onto a staircase railing because the ship was hanging over to the one side. We couldn't sleep, we waited. You wait for the next wave to capsize the ship. It was so dark. The water was dark, the waves were enormous. One moment you're on top of the wave and I could actually see the lights of other ships close to us, but the water was so rough they could not come near us. So one moment you're on top of this wave and the next you're in the bottom of it with nothing to see but black. When I think back on it, I never saw anybody that was out of control or hysterical. Everybody was calm, as if we were waiting for our fate.
Most of the crew had abandoned by this stage, but the captain stood quietly, holding onto a pole on the pool deck. Moss spoke to him a few times, pleading for him to help, as he called over the radio to nearby ships, but he refused. It was clear by this stage that Ioannis Avranos was in a state of shock, unable to take charge.
And eventually we had 3 ships in the area quite close to us, but they couldn't come very close because it was still a bad storm. So the only thing left was to try and get helicopters. So these ships radioed back to the South African authorities, and then they tried to organize helicopters, which they did, and they had to fly to us, but it took them nearly 4 hours to get to us. We were quite close to the shore. We were about 12 miles out at sea, but we were in a very remote area. And it's not like in the United States or England where they have a big Coast Guard system, and it's a fantastic system. There, if you're in trouble, they can help you. In South Africa, there's very little of that. So eventually the helicopters came, and by that time it was dawn. And when the helicopters arrived, they were sort of flying in. I sort of took some video footage of them flying in, and it looks incredible. And they came and they hovered over the front of the ship.
And then I saw the helicopters flying towards us. It was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. They were there to rescue us. Lorraine Betts, she was one of the entertainment crew, started to cut down the lights to make space for the helicopters to airlift us to safety. That was at first light, so the long wait started all over again. We realized after hours that they airlift from both ends of the ship. So we went to the other line, which moved a bit quicker.
As the helicopter was hovering overhead, then they would lower the Navy diver on a cable, but the more they lowered him, the more the wind blew, and he started to swing from side to side. And so that's where I then went out onto the foredeck. I left the bridge, and I found some rope, tied it around my waist, and I tied it around the railing of the ship, because the deck was so steep, it was like that. And eventually I managed to catch one of the Navy divers, pull him down, and then pull the second one down. And then the 2 Navy divers said, look, we can see from the air that this ship is in bad trouble. And they said, it's going to sink. It could sink very quickly. We think we're going to lose people today. We have to try and get everybody off in the helicopter harness. And then the Navy diver said to me, look, there was a small rigid inflatable boat on our ship called a Zodiac. We sent the one Navy diver went down with Julian the magician, and they went to launch the Zodiac, so we had them in the water, so we had somebody who knew what they were doing, and they could pick people up if they fell in the water. And then they gave me a quick course on how to put the harness on the people, and I had to learn what signals to give to the helicopters to give me more cable or lower the harness, or when we were ready to pull the people up. And then the Navy diver said, look, we're going to try and have 2 helicopters at the same time, one in the front of the ship, one at the back of the ship, and they'll both hover over the ship. It's dangerous because the winds are so strong, but if we work really quickly, we might be able to get everybody off.
And then the rescue started. We had to line up, as queue. And I was one of the first. My family, we were some of the first people down in the beginning of the queue, and I was standing there against the rail, just watching and watching the people coming in. Going to the harness, being helped towards the harness. And then Paul came along to me, and he came and he introduced himself to me. And he asked me for assistance, he asked me to help him. And, I said, well, there's no problem. I will try and help as much as I can. And that's how I got involved in the rescue. I suppose, as they say, I would say that I was at the right place at the right time. And for me, what we've done was quite a good thing, and I think we can give ourselves a tap on the back, which was quite great. That youngster, he's such a fantastic guy. a strong guy and a strong-willed guy, and really, really nice guy. I enjoyed every minute that I spent with him on the deck harnessing the passengers. At one stage, we were busy harnessing, and I remember the couple so well. It's a husband and his wife. We were harnessing them, and somehow or other, they took the helicopter took them up, and somehow or other he slipped out of his harness and he fell into the ocean. I don't know whether it was 20 or 30 or 40 meters that he fell, but apparently he was knocked unconscious, and Paul, while he dived into the water and to go and rescue this guy, and he swam, and the swells were big, so he couldn't really see where this gentleman were. So we tried to point him in a direction, and eventually got him to him, but then already there was a lifeboats around us from the ships that were hanging, and it was in the area there. There was quite a few of them that's there, and they put their lifeboats down. So Paul got him onto the lifeboat, and Paul came back. He came back, swam back to the Oceanos.
He came past me after he came back from the water, and I remembered his arms were cut and bleeding. I suppose that was in his struggle to get back onto the ship, and he was cut by shells. He took my arm, looked me in the eye, and told me to hang on. I think he could see the fear in my eyes. I will never forget that. This is close to 29 years later, and I clearly remember him telling me to hold on.
And so we had then about, I can't remember the exact number, but somewhere between about 230 to 250 people still on board. And we split them in half, so I took half of them to the front with Tracy, and the Navy diver and one other guy went to the back of the ship. They rescued half of the people, say about 120, 25 people from there, and I took the other 120, 25 to the front and just put them into the harnesses, one after the other. We did two at a time as fast as we could to get them all off.
Once again, a human chain was formed to get you to the point where the helicopter airlifts. The deck was slippery from the seawater coming over the side of the ship. I don't know if that chain was formed by crew or by passengers. I know that it was asked of the young and strong men on board to help getting the people off as quickly as possible. Time was of the essence. When me and my friend Beulah come to the front of the line, I desperately wanted my husband to come with me. He told me that he's going to stay behind to help get the rest of the people off as quickly as possible. So the two of us, Beulah and me, were hooked up in this harness, and off we go. The wind was so strong. The wind smashed us against the side of the ship. Beulah's glasses broke on her face as she hit the ship. My left leg hit the ship, and as that happened, my shoes fell into the sea. I was just praying that we get safely into the helicopter. All I did was hold on and keep my eyes on the man waiting for us in the opening of that helicopter. When we were safely inside, I looked down at the ship. It was like looking at a horror movie. The ship hanging in the water, helicopters airlifting people from both sides. It was unreal. The moment the helicopter was full, and I cannot remember how many people, but I think it was, say, about 15 to 20 people, then the pilot flew out to the haven. It was a big grassy area where they dropped us off. There was some kind of building, and I saw the captain was sitting there sipping his beer and his dog at his side. I was thinking, why is he there? Is the captain not supposed to be on the ship till the last person is off safely?
As the rescue operations came to a close, the interior of the Oceanos was becoming more and more hazardous. The water level inside the ship had reached Venus deck. This meant that 4 decks had already flooded within the Oceanos, and it would only get worse as time went on.
And then eventually, we only had 12 passengers left on board, plus myself and Tracy, who was the last woman on board by hours, and she was fantastic during the rescue. And we had one guy left on the bridge, Robin. And then eventually the ship started to go down so fast in the bow, right in the front, that we had to abandon the rescue there, and we had to move the last 12 people to the back of the ship. And that was difficult because the ship was tipped right over on its side and starting to lift out of the water. We managed to get those 12 people to the back, rescued them, and then finally Tracy and I, we put the harness on ourselves. We got lifted off, and then we left the Navy diver on the ship for a few minutes more.
There are now only 2 people on board the Oceanos, Paul Wiley and Piet Niemand, they decide to go below decks to see if there's anyone that is still inside.
So what we did is we obviously went back into the ship. We went to the restaurant, and the entertainment area was basically one big area, but it was just separated from your tables and chairs for your dinner tables, and that type of thing was separate. So we went in there first, and the pub was also, the bar was also there inside the entertainment area and the restaurant. But we went downstairs. The water was already splashing there on top there when we got down. Let's call it the first floor from the deck down. For myself, I went to the toilet because I needed to go to the toilet. And when I got there, it's just water coming out of the toilet. With the roll of the ship, it just overflows. So we didn't want to go any further than that, but there was nobody around who shouted and asked and screamed and so on. But there was nobody around, and we gathered that everybody will be out there unless they got trapped in there somewhere and one can't find them. But thank God for that there was nobody like that. So yeah, and once we were finished there, look, it was thirsty work. I'm telling you now, and I still said to Paul, we walked over to the pub area. Well, we crawled and walked and held on here and held on there because it was listing so badly already that we couldn't really walk. We was actually basically crawling and holding on to whatever we could hold on to that is solid. Yeah. And then we grabbed a cooling there, and I think it was a Coke that it was, and yeah, we just drank that, and we couldn't find anything stronger than that, so we wouldn't have been. As I said, it was at the where the lights were on, but it was still quite dark in there, so we had to feel our way around the bar there, what was there, and yeah, luckily we got hold of something.
It wasn't long after that when the helicopters arrived. They picked up both Piet Niemand and Paul Wiley, and then the Oceanos became abandoned, sinking, alone. As the ship's list worsens, water begins to wash onto the bow. 3 open vents and 2 doors, opened before or during the sinking by crew members, allows tons of water into the ship, causing a rapid plunge. Within minutes of this, the ship would finally go down. As news reports flashed around the world, the wreck of the Oceanos began its decay. Only 1 week after the ship had sunk, a remote camera was lowered onto the wreck to see what it looked like and also to determine the cause of sinking. Their findings were inconclusive, and the ship would not be seen until 10 years later, when a manned submersible returned to the wreck.
Okay, we're on the wreck. Railing. No, I think you're gonna have to go up a bit. Ooh. Wow. Down on the seafloor here, there's one of these propellers. I'll kind of drop down next to it, and then we can take back off again. Should get a good view of this propeller now looking out of that port. It's going to come into view here in just a second. It's lying on the bottom. It's all these ropes are connected to it.
What you see here is the spare propeller. It used to be located on the bow of the ship, but has since been knocked off and now lays in the sand. Based off the wreck footage, it can clearly be seen that the bow is broken off. This occurred when the bow slammed into the ocean floor during the sinking. Shortly after the sinking, an investigation was held. Andrew Pike was one of the people who worked on that investigation.
There was a formal investigation in which I participated. So there were English lawyers involved who came out from London. There was my law firm in Durban that was giving support to those English lawyers, and then a lot of technical investigators. And our role was to find out why the ship sank and ultimately to put enough facts in front of an insurance company for the insurer to pay out the owner if the loss of the ship was something that was covered by the insurance policy. So basically we were out to find out whether it was crew negligence, whether the ship had sank as a result of just wear and tear because it was too old, or if there was some other reason. And ultimately we discovered that there was crew negligence in the sense that the crew were doing some repairs to the ship while she was at sea, and that would usually be something that would have threatened the integrity of the ship, and very unusual to have done those particular repairs at a time when the ship was in a vulnerable state in very poor weather. So ultimately we did make a finding that there was crew negligence, and that was backed up by the official inquiry. It was a preliminary inquiry in South Africa and then an official one in Greece. And my understanding is that the Greek inquiry found that there had been crew negligence on the part of the captain and the officers. The crew were very reticent with us and didn't want to tell us what had actually happened. And it turned out that during the voyage from East London, which is where she had sailed from, they had started working on a sewerage system, and passengers had been complaining about the smell on the ship. And what had happened was that the sewerage system had got blocked. And so they started taking steps to clear the blockage. But that required them to remove a pipe which ran through a watertight bulkhead or an internal retaining wall, if you like. And by taking that pipe out, they made what should have been a watertight wall or bulkhead not watertight any longer. It was made unseaworthy whilst she was at sea. In terms of whether she was seaworthy before she set out for the voyage, I think she was. I don't believe she would have been allowed to trade in South African waters if she had not been inspected by our Department of Transport before she went on charter. But having said that, there were stories from passengers and entertainers of a cargo door which fell into the harbour in Durban before the ship, on the penultimate voyage of the ship. And I also came across a story from one passenger who claims that they were working on the sewage system before the ship even left the port of East London, its last departure port. So it may have been unseaworthy even when it set out, but certainly it was made unseaworthy during the voyage.
Another member of the investigation, Richard Daggett, created a model on his computer to figure out why the ship actually sank.
Computing was certainly not what it is today. It enables you to build and to flood it where you think it might have been flooded. You take the shape of the ship off drawings and you put a whole bunch of points on the hull into your model, which then allows you to calculate things like buoyancies, volumes, centers of flotation, all that kind of stuff. you determine where the center of gravity of the ship actually is, and then you put that into the model, and then that allows you to load the model with fuel, oil, water, people, cargo, all that kind of stuff. Because we had photographs of the ship sinking at various stages, we were able to see the position of the ship in terms of heel and or list and trim, down by the head, down by the stern, whatever. So that's really what the model was. Nothing fancier than that. There was talk during the interviews of there being valves on the forward side of that forward bulkhead with spindles that ran up through the decks, somewhere in the accommodation, that would have shut off the valve on the forward side of the forward bulkhead, going into the sewage system or from the sewage system or something. Again, I recollect somebody saying that they looked for that valve wheel and couldn't find it. If those valves had been able to be closed, then the water would not have gone into the sewage system.
From a very young age, I've always been interested in shipwrecks. I was obsessed with the Titanic. It's something that's always fascinated me. And the shipwrecks of the past that do get the most recognition are ones that end in such tragedy. The Oceanos, though, I do understand that the cruise line was sort of obscure. Nobody really knows about the Epirotiki lines, especially in 2020. And the ship was being chartered at the time, so it wasn't from Carnival or Royal Caribbean or anything. But I think because it is so unknown and so, I wouldn't even say unknown. It doesn't have any tragedy elements to it other than the terrible captain. It really boils down to this sort of unknown ship with an incredible story, and so many people don't know about that. So I think when I look at things now from any perspective, no matter how basic or plain or boring something may seem, once you start to actually dig down into the past of something, it could really open up an incredible story that most people would just never know. So after knowing about this story of the Oceanos, it's really encouraged me to sort of dig deeper on topics that most people would never even think to do, because at surface level it just seems like a boring topic. So I think the story of the Oceanos is truly an incredible one, and it's taught me, it's given me some hope in humanity, I think, because of how incredible everyone was on board that ship that night.